This Lumingdong have a Chinese department. Department of Chinese and Mr. Simon Sun and Miss Mary Sun, humanities institutes are very honored to invite Professor Ronald Egan as our speaker for today's lecture. Professor Egan is a famous American sinologist and professor of sinology at Stanford University. He received his PhD in Chinese literature in Harvard University. Over the years, he has published many high-impact, excellent works in classical Chinese literature, especially 苏东坡的研究。Let's welcome Ronald with Ron at post. In March this year, Professor Egan was awarded the title of Outstanding Visiting Scholar of the Creative Research Institute of Hong Kong Baptist University, and he will provide two public literatures, sharing his insights on Chinese classical literature and cultural studies. This is his second literature in Hong Kong BU. I'm happy to be a moderator for Ronald's talk. The topics of his literature is the emergence of composite text image art in Ming-Qing period painting. He will present his findings of inscribing text, poem, and prose on Chinese painting. Maybe one important question to address: how the painters in the 17th century discovered the potential of the two media, and literary, and combine each other, creating a new kind of composite art. I believe Ronald will tell us the answer. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank Professor Law for a kind introduction. Is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Law, for your kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to see you all show up for this morning session. And in the audience, there are several old friends, and it's a delight to see you all today. I'll start with a bit of a disclaimer. This is a topic, what I'm talking about today, this is a topic that I'm really not a specialist in. This is not my life work. I'm not an art historian. My field is literary studies of earlier periods, mostly Tang Song. I'm not a Ming-Qing specialist, so in a way I'm really out of my my narrow platform of knowledge. But I got interested in this topic of inscriptions on literary inscriptions on painting. I'll be very frank with you. I got interested in it because I kept noticing that art historians, where my professional life is in USA, that art historians of Chinese art in North America neglect writing on Chinese paintings. And that's kind of a gross generalization, but it's one that I kept running into, and the more I noticed it, the more it bothered me. Because as you all already know, writing text, written words inscribed on Chinese painting is one of the most noticeable features of Chinese painting when compared to painting in pre-modern times anywhere else. So, how can such a conspicuous trait be sort of systematically ignored by art historians, So, and maybe it's not nearly so much ignored by art historians in Asia, in Hong Kong and China and Taiwan. I'd like to think that that's the case. And I'll show you today, among my examples, I'll show you a rather conspicuous disregard or lack of attention to a Chinese painting with a poem inscribed on it by the most famous American historian of Chinese painting. So, in part, this is sort of a private interest of mine, and also I like to talk about this topic thinking that I may be able to influence people, especially younger people, to begin to pay more scholarly attention to words inscribed on Chinese painting. I've published only one article on this topic myself, and I'm not sure in the future how much more I'll be able to do in this line. But it is this field of the intersection of Chinese, especially Chinese poetry, and Chinese painting as a field is really underexplored, I feel. And I'm hoping by occasionally giving talks like this about it to interest other people and to encourage people to think about giving some attention to this field, because it's very rich and fascinating and understudied, I think, greatly understudied. So words written on Chinese painting could roughly be divided into two categories. The first is words put there by the artist himself, and the second is words put there by some later person, usually a collector or, someone who appreciates the painting and has been invited by whoever owns it to add an inscription of some kind, okay? So of those two categories, I want to make it very clear, I'm speaking only about the first category today. I'm much less interested in what somebody added, 200 years later to a painting than I am interested in what the artist himself added to the painting, okay? Because when the artist himself puts it there, I don't see how you can not view it as an integral part of the artwork itself. When some later collector adds something, that's an afterthought, right? It's not from the artist himself. So everything I'm going to say today is about words put there by the artist himself. However, that category can itself be further subdivided into two. And my talk today is organized around these two subgroups. What are they? The first one is when the artist puts words there himself, and they are his own words. He's thought of something that he wants to add to his painting, which in most cases he just finished. And he often tells us, when he did it. Sometimes he dates it. But they are his words, whether it's a little poem or a couple lines of a poem, or whether it's a prose inscription. We'll see some examples of both. They're his words. The other category is when the artist picks up a brush and writes on his own painting again, but they're not his words. He's quoting often from something that was written centuries earlier. The typical thing is he's quoting poetry from the past. And all of my examples today are 17th century. So end of Ming, Mingguo, Qing Chu, end of Ming, beginning of Qing. They're all from one century. And what these artists are typically doing, if they're quoting something from centuries earlier, it tends to be Tang poetry. It's not only Tang poetry, but it tends to be. Tang poetry is by far the most often quoted thing. And you'll see, and so now we have an artist, again, choosing to put words on his own painting, but those words didn't come from the mind of the artist himself. They came from some Tang poet, and that's, okay, these are 17th century paintings. Then the words, if he's quoting a Tang poem, obviously he's quoting something that's 800 or 900 years old, right? And that creates a very interesting dynamic between what he has painted and for whatever reason he's decided to quote something. Now you can ask, well, did he think of it before he ever started doing the painting? Did he think of these lines? Let's say they're Tang poetry. Did he think of it before he ever started the painting? In other words, had he done the painting with those lines in mind, or are they an afterthought? He did a painting, he did a beautiful landscape painting, and then later, maybe that evening, or maybe 2 weeks later, or maybe 2 years later, he thought, oh yeah, there's that couplet of Du Fu. It would go nicely with what I painted. And often we cannot tell. Often, did he have those lines? Is he painting those lines, or are the lines that he added an afterthought of his? Often, sometimes you can tell. Sometimes they actually tell you. I added this. I did the painting, 3 years ago, and today I'm adding these lines because it just occurred to me that they're so appropriate. But usually you cannot tell. Usually they're not going to tell you. Okay, so that's an unknown. It's often an unknown. So I think that's the Those are most of the preliminary things I wanted to say first. I'm going to show you just 3 examples from my first category, which is the artist's own words, and then I'm going to show you a few more, like 7 or 8 examples of paintings that are inscribed with words from the historical past, from the literary historical past that the artist has put there. Oh, and one other thing, you'll see, I think I have indicated in each example where the painting is from. And you'll see, okay, so Beijing Gugong. You'll see several of my examples are Beijing Gugong. I think I have one example, Taipei Gugong. But I have a lot of examples from New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. And why is that? I feel I should explain why. There's a movement in museums around the world, but it's mostly an American and European movement advocating open access. And the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City is a leader of this movement. And what this means, it has different names. There's actually associations of museums that have joined a group pledged to develop open access. What this means is that a museum that subscribes to this philosophy, strives to make their entire image collection available in high quality images on the internet for free. And I think that this kind of study, insofar as you can't begin to generalize, as I'm going to try to do, about the emergence of this composite art, until you see a lot of examples. You can't just look at 10 or 20 examples. You got to look at hundreds of examples before you can begin to understand what's going on. To be able to look at hundreds of examples from the 17th, in one specific time period is not an easy thing to do. If I had to go to all the museums, on the ground, there's no way I could have done this, okay? So, and the Met in New York has now put essentially its entire collection of art, not just Chinese, all art, something like 400,000 images online, available, downloadable, high quality. The kind of image you can magnify and it stays in focus. Okay, you can use it, you can download it, you can publish it, and they don't even want you to ask for permission. Not only do they not want a fee from you, like most museums do, they tell you don't even ask us. Just go ahead and do whatever you want with it. Publish. I mean, this is really a revolution in the study of art history. It's only like 10 or 15 years old that this has begun to happen. And a few other museums in America are following suit. Some museums in France and England are beginning to do this. Unfortunately, museums in Asia are lag behind in this movement. And we can only hope that they'll catch up in the future. Okay, so here's a painting by Shi. Remember, my first 3 examples are all words that the painter put there himself. I'm showing you, this is an entire painting from an album, Shan Shui Hua, and the words that are up there, inscribed there, it's 2 lines, 彩铃未归去，童子立经飞. They're his words. So, how about the second line, 童子立经飞? Can you see anything that corresponds to that? You can, right? Right? Okay. But how about the first line? 彩铃未归去. 彩铃there should be somebody in a boat, right? Ling is a water, aquatic, right, plant. And 彩铃 or 彩莲子, right, is traditionally in Chinese, in traditional pre-modern Chinese culture, it tends to be a woman's labor, woman's activity. So there should be a woman in a boat. Does anyone see her? Yeah. Oh, Wei Gui Shu, I think you're suggesting that she's not there. Yeah. Well, I got news for you. She is there. She is there. Okay? She's right here. Oh. She's right there. Okay? Whoop. And now she's back. Okay. So what do you suppose is the relationship between these 2 people who are featured in the lines that the artist inscribed on his painting? What do you suppose is their relationship? Yeah, the son is waiting, and the son looks like he's pretty young, right? He looks like he's 4 years old or something. And why is he standing at the door? I have an idea he's standing at the door because the last thing his mother told him before she left was, whatever you do, don't go out of the don't go out of the door, right? Isn't that the kind of thing the mother would say? And this child seems to be obedient, unlike many. So, and what's the point of this? What's the mood? What's the mood of this painting? How does the little boy feel? He's anxious for his mother to come home, right? That's why he's standing. Maybe he's been there for hours just waiting, right? But his mother is not coming home yet because she has to put in hours of work, 彩铃, right? And she's doing this either for her own family to eat as food or maybe to sell, right? I'm pretty confident in saying that Shi Tao is presenting to us a portrait of the hardships of poverty in the countryside. And other leaves in the same album, you know, are along the same line. Shi Tao, by the way, is he's a member of the Ming Dynasty imperial family who was 3 years old when the Manchus invaded and destroyed the Ming Dynasty. And so when he grew up, he couldn't come. He's lucky he wasn't killed, actually. And he became a Buddhist monk. But painting is his. I mean, he's a leading 17th century painter. So this is my first example, and I use it as an example of, if you don't look at the words, you're never going to figure out what the painting is about, because you'd never see that, right? You might see the boy and notice, but there's no way you would understand what this painting is about unless you read Shi Tao's inscription. Why in the world would he paint the mother so hard to find, so hard to see? Well, I could think of two reasons. Maybe you in the audience can think of more. One, it occurred to me, maybe he's trying to represent the way the son feels. Oh my God, my mother's out there somewhere, but I have no idea where she is. And another possibility, I think, is maybe Shi Tao is trying to represent the almost complete invisibility that this impoverished family would have in the eyes of most men of his, most wenshi, right? Most men of his class, as they pass through this countryside. Are they going to notice that woman out in the boat? No, probably not, right? That even if they see her, their eye will, right? It's not something they are probably not going to pay attention to, and Shi Tao wants us to pay attention to it, and that's why, on the one hand, he painted her in such an obscure, hard to find way, but on the other hand, called attention to her by inscribing lines on the poem, on the painting. Okay, here's another example, a very different kind of example. Gongxian, as you know, this famous Nanjing painter. This is not typical of Gongxian's style. And again, I'm showing you the whole painting. I'm not showing a detail. This is the whole painting. It's a painting of willow branches in winter, so there's no greenery on them. It's quite remarkable, right? I mean, this looks so modern. It's quite a remarkable painting. And he has, on the facing page of this album, he has this inscription. Now this time, it's not a poem. He's telling us about his history of painting willows. And this is what he says, my English translation. In painting wild willows, I originally took Zhang Changheng, Zhang Liufang as my model, but lately, whenever I see Changheng's willows, I feel rather dissatisfied with them. Is it possible that I have surpassed him? I must keep looking for a painting of willows by Changheng to examine them anew. If I'm going to assign this comment by the artist to a type, I would assign it to the type in which the artist comments on his own history, his own training and history as an artist of this subject matter. Now, this comment, it belongs, and there are a lot of artistic comments on paintings that fulfill this function. They tell us, I'm painting this, I have a history of painting this, and my history goes back to when I took so-and-so as my mentor. I took so-and-so as a model. This man he names is a generation earlier than he himself, okay? Now, what's unusual about this kind of comment in this case is that it's pretty arrogant, right? It's pretty arrogant. He's saying, right, this is like Qing Chu La, the East, right? It's like he doesn't quite come out and say so explicitly, but he clearly wants us to think that, gee, you know, I've acquired such skill at this subject matter in painting that now I'm when I look at the man I used to take as my teacher, I'm dissatisfied, right? So this is quite unusually arrogant, but there it is. But there it is, okay? So this is very different. He's not from the first example I showed you where we need to read the words to literally understand what we're looking at. Here, Gongxian is telling us about his own process of learning and training and progress as a painter. I'll skip this one. And then here we go to Jin Nong, famous flower painter of 17th into 18th century. So we're looking at this probably youngish boy, maybe teenager, who has one foot on a stool so he can get a better view of what seems to be a lotus pond outside the window in the background. And okay, Jin Nong then added this, it's Yisou Ci, and this is what it says. The lotus flowers are in blossom, the silvery pond is perfectly still, a morning newly cool, how many darting dragonflies are there? Okay, so far so good. This all looks like the first stanza of what he wrote is, you know, perfectly compatible with what we're looking at, the image that we're looking at, okay? But that changes in the second stanza of what he wrote. Numerous watery porticos connect, air flows gently from a fan. I remember sitting together with her, her slender fingers peeling lotus seed pods. What in the world is he talking about? I remember sitting with her. Well, there's not two people, you know, there's only one person there. And those lines from the second stanza sound like the memory of a romantic, relationship. Some woman is sitting with, and he remembers some woman sitting there with some woman, and she's peeling, you know, these lotus seeds to give to him to eat. It's like it's almost a little bit erotic, right? This recollection. Okay. Now we come back and we think, what in the world? What's the relationship between that second stanza and this image that we're looking at? And I'm hoping some of you can tell me what the answer is, because I don't have it. To me, this is a puzzle. To me, this is a puzzle. It's an anomaly. It's a disjuncture, right, between the image the painter has created and the poem that the painter himself. If this was someone else's poem, we would say, oh, he chose it because the first stanza was appropriate, and he put the second stanza there, but we shouldn't take that seriously. But it's not someone else's poem. It's Jin Nong's poem himself. So, I mean, is he deliberately creating a disjunction to, like, you know, jar us, to, like, you know, or is there some other explanation? And you know, I've talked about this with other people, and sometimes people say, well, you know, he's remembering his own youth, and he's remembering a scene from his youth when he had his first romantic, you know, ship. And but then what's the boy, and why is the boy standing on a stool? And someone actually said, the funniest answer I ever heard was, someone said, oh, the boy's looking at a romantic couple who are across the pond. He's peeping at a man and woman, you know, being affectionate in some other building. That's what's going on. Who knows? Who knows? But I think this is interesting as an example of seeming incompatibility, that maybe the artist, you know, deliberately does this to, like, set our expectations. The title of my talk today is the emergence of poetry painting as joint art, and I should say that if you in the Mingqing period, in Mingqing transition, if you go back far enough, you can find earlier examples. Of course, you can find examples in the Song Dynasty of artists inscribing their paintings with poems, either of their own making or someone else. How about the Tang Dynasty? No, I mean, maybe there's some example somewhere, but it would be hard to find. And it's not even common. In the Song dynasty you can find it, but it's not widespread. Only in the southern Song it begins to be widespread. But this practice of the artist commenting on his own painting really becomes widespread, not until toward the end of Ming dynasty and into Qing. It becomes so widespread that you almost expect it by then. Whereas you can find it in Song Yuan period, but you don't really expect it. But then by Ming-Qing times, and I'll comment on some reasons why I think this is so. And now we're going to move on to inscriptions written out by the artist but composed by an earlier writer. And this becomes very characteristic, very distinctive in Ming-Qing paintings. I'm going to show you some examples, and I'm going to move from the simplest to more complex examples. What I mean simple and complex is I'm talking about the nature of the relationship between the image and the words. And remember, these are all old words. These are all historical, mostly couplets from historical poems that the artist has chosen to put there. So this is the simplest one, where every darn part of the image in the painting can be accounted for by what was in the Tang poem. So here's the lines. Birds nest in trees beside the pond. A monk knocks on the gate beneath the moon. Jiadao. These are pretty well-known lines. So there you have the monk knocking on the right on the left-hand side. The monk knocking on the gate. Here you have. Can you see there are a lot of birds in the tree? Right. It's not just a tree. It's a tree filled with birds. And there you have the moon. Right, which is up hanging over the gate. There's the moon. Okay, so you know it's only 10 Chinese characters, right? And all the images from the characters are there in the painting. It's a very simple one-to-one relationship between poetic lines, images in poetic lines, and images in the so obviously this painter is painting those two lines, right? It's not, those two lines could not be an afterthought. The correspondence is too close between lines and painting. Okay, that was my simplest example. This next example, also by Shi Tao, is also pretty simple, but it's not as, there's more cleverness here than in the painting I just showed you. So this is the famous Wang Wei poem, 九月九东兄弟, right? And in this case, it's the whole poem that Shi Tao, right? 独在异乡为异客. It's the whole poem, not just a couplet that Shi Tao has inscribed. And so I say it's a little more clever in the sense that, you know, the poem says, third line, 遥知兄弟登高处, right? So it sounds like what Wang Wei is thinking about is these two brothers already on the mountaintop, picking these Zhuyu Hua, right, and putting them in their hair, which is the Tongjiu custom. But look, of course, the painter has not painted them on the mountaintop. The painter's painted them back home, down here, right? So that it's, you know, so why didn't he paint them on the mountaintop? Because after a while you get a feeling for Shi Tao that would be too predictable. Okay, that would be too, you know, and maybe he feels it would be a little weird to paint these two guys on the mountaintop. It's more natural to paint them back home. But notice that he's painted, you know, two men, right? So the third one is Shao Yiren, right? That's the one who's missing. So he's conspicuously painted two. And the other thing, does anyone want to tell us some other little piece of cleverness in this painting? I would say number one is the painter has not painted the men on the mountaintop like they are in the poem. And number two, also has, the one that I'm thinking of also has something to do with the mountaintop. Is there anything else, any other visual element that strikes you in this painting that looks unusual? What? The mountain? The path to the mountain is very conspicuous. It's almost like a highway, right? Right? You could drive a truck up that, right? So, right? I mean, that's unusual. So, I mean, why is that there? Why did he paint it that way? He wants our eye to be drawn to the top of the mountain. He's showing us that's where those two guys were, right? The mountaintop is very accessible, right? So this is I think the way to explain this oddity is to say this is 石头 being 石头. He's very clever. And my next example is Yun Shouping, who, as you may know, is probably the foremost painter of color in 17th century. Loves bright, vivid colors. And here he's quoting not even a couplet, just a single line by Li Bai, and then he says something about it. So here's what he. So these, this is his inscription, and Li Bai Shi, right? 风吹柳花满店香, right? Li Bai's poem says, "Wind blows the willow blossoms, filling the wine shop with fragrance." And here's the whole poem. So he's not interested in the whole poem. He's just interested in the first line. And then what he says is what Yun Shouping says after he quotes Li Bai's line is very interesting. Of old, people praise this use of the word xiang, fragrance. People like in Shihua comment the xiang, Li Bai's use of the xiang zi, is very noteworthy, is very special. Why is it special? I suppose it's special because liu hua, the xiang of liu hua is not that strong, right? So it's a man dian xiang, right? He's implying that on this particular day, and this is a parting poem, so it's and liu hua is associated with not wanting someone to leave, right? So it's like everyone is overcome by the awareness of liu hua. But then Shouping says, why can't we ask a painter to transmit visually the spirit of that fragrance? This is the first instance we'll see today, and we'll see others, of a kind of undercurrent I notice in 17th century painters' comments when they're dealing with Tang poetry. There's a kind of competition, okay? There's a kind of, and you see it very clearly here. Everyone says, Li Bai 用这个香字很特别, right? And then he says, "Oh, why can't a painter do something like that too?" And so in his painting, by using beautiful colors and painting such a lavish, he's making the claim. He's implicitly making the claim that we painters can create an artwork with images just as striking, just as memorable as Li Bai created with words, right? So there's this, and let's remember, by the time you get to the 17th century in Chinese cultural history, Tang poetry is like so prestigious, right? Tang poetry is like, what could be greater than Tang, right? What could be greater in Chinese cultural history than in the Ming or Qing periods? Painting may be great, but it's not yet of the stature of Tang poetry. Okay, so all the more reason why these painters would be like looking over their shoulder at the Tang poets and trying to lift the status, the stature, the prestige of their own art. So okay, the Tang poets, they're great. They did what they did, but look here, we can do something too. You see this a lot. You see this kind of attitude a lot in Ming-Qing comments, which I think is very interesting from the standpoint of cultural history. Oh, that's real willow blossoms. In case you can't visualize something actually looking like that, I included that photo. Okay, here's another example. Wang Jian, one of the famous Si Wang of early Qing painting history, and this is a lovely painting. This is a detail of the lower. So here's the whole painting, the detail of the lower portion. And two lines from a Tang poem by an obscure Tang poet, someone named Su Ting, who was not obscure in court history. He was a prime minister, but he's obscure in poetic history. Anyway, what he says is, 云山一一看皆美，竹书笑笑画不成. This is actually a poem about the emperor going out of Chang'an into the hills, and his whole entourage, his whole big imperial procession. And the poet, the Tang poet, says, hua bu cheng, because everything is so impressive, everything is so beautiful. Hua bu cheng, and especially the sound of the bamboo, of the wind in the bamboo and trees, could never be painted. And so here again, you see this sense of competition. What? So Wang Jian is saying, what? You tell me I could never paint it? I'll paint it, and I'll quote your words saying it could never be painted, just to like show you that I disagree. Just to show you I disagree. Okay. Here, Hong Ren, another monk, 17th century monk painter. Very interesting. This is the first case in which the images of the lines that are quoted are actually, the content of the images of the lines quoted are actually said by the painter to be irrelevant. Two lines from early Tang poet Wei Zheng, I quoted at the bottom, Shu Huai, Ku Mu Ming Han Niao, Shen Shan Wen Ye Yuan, okay? And so that's the way he begins his inscription, and then he comments, these are lines of Tang poetry. By chance I drew this painting based on them. The painting does not depict the content of the lines. So, yeah, that's right. I mean, are there any cold birds in the painting? No. Are there any gibbons in the painting? No. Okay. So he's very upfront. The painting does not depict the content of the line, but in the deserted quality of the empty landscape and twisted movement of the tree, I've tried to capture something of the lonely solitude of those lines. So, you know, to me this is interesting because it's no longer the poetic images, it's the feeling. Right? Now I'm painting the feel. I'm not. So here's a painter who's transcended the more straightforward idea of, oh, I should paint something of the image, even if I alter them a little bit, you know, and paint a very wide mountain path up to the top of the mountain. Here, I'm not even going to bother painting the images. I want to paint the feeling. So this is a different strategy, right? So again, I said I was moving from the more simple, the more straightforward, you might say the more faithful, to the more creative, the more far-fetched, the more innovative strategies. I'm going to skip Dong Qichang. Okay, Shi Tao, back. You see that Shi Tao is one of my. I have more examples of Shi Tao than of any other painter because he's so creative and so interesting. This is a little album leaf, and here's the inscribed lines that Shi Tao wrote, and here they are translated. And we read these lines, and then we might wonder, okay, who would not break out in song? Well, is there a person in the painting who might be singing? Whoops. Yes, there's a person. Okay. It's that person. It might be the one who's looking out the window at the landscape. He might be the one who's, you know, on the verge of breaking out into song because the landscape is so beautiful. But let's go back to the lines. It turns out, now I want to tell you that these painters who quote ancient poetry, sometimes they tell you what they're doing, but that's exceptional. Usually they do not tell you that they're quoting. How do they not tell you? They don't give you the original title of the poem, nor do they tell you I'm quoting, or nor do they give you the name of the poet. And so it's often the case, I'm speaking from experience and experience of being wrong, okay? It's often the case that you'll read these what are in fact quotations of earlier poetry, and you'll assume, as I have done several times, that those are the artist's words. But now, of course, with the internet, all you have to do is type in a few. So now I check every time. Because 8 times out of 10, the lines that look like they must be original with the artist turn out not to be. They turn out to be, you know, Tang poetry or something. So now I check every time. So this is the first point I want to make about these 4 lines, is that he didn't tell us he was quoting anything, but it turns out he is. Now, in this case, it's not Tang poetry, it's Nanbei Chao Fu, okay, Jiang Yan, Hen Bie Fu. And then the second point I want to make is that he's not just quoting, he's rewriting. And he's rewriting in a very dramatic fashion, okay? The original passage from this long, long Fu, 恨别父, is all about the hardship of parting. And the fu consists of, this is a fu is pretty well known. It's in Wenxue. I believe it's in Wenxue, yes. It's all about like 1,000 different parting scenarios and the nanguo, the misery that it causes you people in all different scenarios. Okay, so I've given you the original. So Shirtao has quoted the first 2 lines of this 4-line passage verbatim, and then the second 2 lines he rewrites it, and the feeling is completely changed from sadness to joy. So what is he doing? I mean, what's going through Shirtao's mind? It seems to me this is what's going through his mind, that he paints this lovely scene, and he remembers, either he already has it in his mind, or as he's painting, whatever. At some point, he recalls this Jiangyan passage, and he specifically recalls the 2 first lines of the passage, 春草绿，春水绿波. And he thinks to himself, oh yeah, and then that's followed by 2 lines that talk about how sad the person is. But here's my speculation. Shirtao was thinking, you know, those 2 lines could lead to a different emotion. Those 2 lines could have a happy resolution, not a sad resolution. And I'm going to give them, by rewriting the 2 lines that follow, I'm going to give them a joyful resolution rather than a sad resolution. Okay? So that's my guess as to, and of course it's clever. It's very clever. It's very creative, right? And so not only does he not tell us that he's quoting anything, he also doesn't tell us that he's rewriting and changing the emotion dramatically from sorrow to joy. So this is Shirtao. You know, he's clever, he's ingenious, he's playful, and he tends to be joyful too, actually. Okay, my last 2 examples. Oh, and I should say, when I began today talking and said that one of the ways I got into this topic was by being bothered that so many Western art historians of Chinese painting ignore the words on the painting. James Cahill, who is the foremost American scholar of Chinese painting history and from whom I've learned a tremendous amount, James Cahill discusses this particular painting, which he's very fond of. He loves this painting, and he has, in one of his books on Mingqing painting, he has a whole page discussion of the images of this painting, which he loves. And he never says a word about the words on the painting. Like he didn't pay attention to them. Like he didn't see them. And I'm thinking to myself, what would Shirtao say? I mean, don't you think that those words were really important to Shirtao? Yeah, it's a beautiful painting, but what's really going on in this painting is not just the painted images. What's really going on is Shirtao transforming this classical Chinese poetic passage. And the art historian is like, sorry, he missed it. Okay, my last example, I have published 1 paper on 2. Dufu, of course, by the time you get to Mingqing times, Dufu is peerless in reputation in literary history. And there's this whole vogue in Mingqing dynasty of albums called Dufu Shi Tu Ce. So albums of poetic lines quoted from Dufu. And believe it or not, we're not talking about a couple dozen Dufu Shi Tu by different artists. We're talking about hundreds of Dufu Shi Tu. So I've seen a list. They're literally like 200 to 300 titles. And not all the albums survive, but these are known from catalogs. I mean, like everyone, you know, it seems almost like every painter at some point produced the Dufu Shi Tu. So, and what these have, they have like 10 or 12 album of paintings, and each painting has a couplet, usually just a couplet, not a whole poem, from a different Dufu poem. So the interest of the album is, you know, how can I visually recreate Dufu, the great Tang poet, in an interesting way? And I have just two examples, which I choose because they contrast. The the approaches the artists use are dramatically different. One is Wang Shimin, who's another one of the Si Wang from early Qing painting history. And that's what I'm showing you here, a leaf from Wang Shimin. And then in a minute I'll show you a leaf from Dufu Shi Tu, also by Shi Tao. And what interests me here is the contrast. So here's the two lines, the lines highlighted, 使出道清枫叶下，路遥被指菊花开. Okay, those are the two lines that Wang Shimin has selected, and and so this poem, this Dufu poem, is a parting poem. He's seeing off this Li Ba Mi Shu, who's going. Where's he going? Where is this? So this is Dufu Tao Tang period, and Dufu has had this guy come visit him, and now this friend is leaving. And where's he going? He's going back to the capital to assume a post in Chang'an in the court. Now just look at how. So the interest is, so this is the parting scene, okay? Here's the gentleman, here's the friend of Dufu, and the boat's going that way, okay? And who's this guy? This is the oarsman, right? This is the guy who's propelling the boat. Okay. Now, back to those two lines. What are the most? Well, the first thing I want to point out. Look how many images Dufu has squeezed into these two lines, right? 使出道庭枫叶, so 使出枫叶, 路遥菊花开, right? And not only that, look at 道庭 and 被指. Those are the most interesting words. Why do I say that? Because they're spatially complicated, right? 道庭, how are you going to paint that? If I was a teacher in a class and I picked those two lines and I gave you all a blank sheet of paper and I said paint that, it's not going to be easy, right? It's going to be a challenge to paint. 道庭, how can I visualize that? And 被指, well, of course you see how brilliantly Wang Shimin has done this, because there's the 枫叶. You see the red color up here? And so this is Dao Ting, right? This is Dao Ting, right? From below I hear, right? The Feng Ye Xia, okay? And the beige, this guy, Ju Hua Kai, do you see the Ju Hua? The yellow, right? And yes, and he's painting. And why is this interesting? Why is this weird? Because the boat's going that way. Right? That guy should be looking ahead. He shouldn't be looking back. But he has to look back because Dufu said beige, right? He has to look back. Okay? And in the poem, probably, why did Dufu write the beige? Why did Steve Owen translated this poem, and Steve thinks that beige is the visitor. But I think actually Wang Shimin's interpretation is better, because it's like the boatman is saying, don't you see what you're leaving? Right? Don't you see? You shouldn't be leaving at this point, right? And of course, Ju Hua Kai also has Taoyuan Ming associations, right? Reclusion. So I can tell you, because I've examined all 12 paintings in this album, I'm only showing you one painting. But it's very clear as you go through the paintings and look carefully at the inscriptions, Wang Shimin likes a challenge. Wang Shimin picks the most, number one, imagistically dense, imagistically complicated, and number two, imagistic spatially challenging, like Dao Ting and beige. It's like he's saying to himself, what Dufu lines are going to be really hard to paint? Okay, I'll pick those. let me see if I can do it. I mean, it's not easy to put all this in one scene, right? It's very complicated visually, spatially. It's very complicated. And I'll go a step further. I'm not sure that Dufu could have done this. I'm not sure that it ever occurred to Dufu. Could this visually be what I've written, these words that I put together, could they actually be visually, in a visually plausible way, could they be represented? And why do I say this? Because Dufu he's not a craftsman of visual image is he's a craftsman of 文字, right? He's a craftsman of words. And Du Fu is thinking of 唐律师. Okay, so if you have Dao Ting, then 背指, right? It has to be parallel. And it's the same position, right? So Du Fu, you know, I'm speculating. I can't prove this. But I think it's entirely possible that Du Fu wasn't worried. You know, if someone came up to Du Fu and tapped him on the shoulder and said, well, yeah, you've written that, but could you actually see such a thing? I think Du Fu would probably say, don't ask me that question. That's not a relevant question. He's worried about the 平仄 of the lines, you know. So anyway, but Wang Shimin is definitely attracted by these difficult, challenging lines. Okay, now here we have the Shitao contrast. So what are we looking at? We're looking at, there's a person, and every one of these, of Shitao's paintings, have this white-robed male figure in them, and this must be Shitao's imagining of Du Fu. This is Shitao's Du Fu in Shitao's imagination. And here are the lines. Now, okay, so 布鹤风吹面，看松露滴声. Okay, fine. But you put them back in the context of the whole Du Fu poem, they take on a whole different... It's not just about someone walking in the landscape at all. This is actually a very troubled poem. This is a poem about warfare and the devastating effects that local rebellion... we know the context. Du Fu's writing about a local rebellion outside of Chengdu. And the village that Du Fu is living in or near has become deserted because the villagers have all run away, either to escape the warfare or to escape conscription, the men being conscripted to put down the rebellion. So the village is empty. So that's why when you read the preceding lines, you know, 空存未见鸟，落日未风人, that's why. And the commentators have, you know, of course, have all explained this. Okay, so when you get to the lines that Shitao chose, 布鹤风吹面，看松露滴声, I put down at the bottom here, I put what Qiu Zhaoao, the famous Du Fu scholar, what he says about those lines, the loneliness, the desolation of the scene that he's walking through. Okay, now with that in mind, we go back to Shitao's painting. There's this guy sitting on a rock, okay, looking out over this river scene. He's not Bu He, okay? He's not walking through some ravine, right? He's sitting there, and yes, okay, there's a pine tree. Maybe it's dripping dew on him, but it all looks very pleasant. It looks like he's quite enjoying himself, okay? So the mood has been completely changed, and you will see, I mean, this is Shitao's creativity. This is Shitao being Shitao, okay? Now, you notice, it's very interesting. So we have two Du Fu Shi Tu Ce, okay? Wang Shimin and Shitao. Wang Shimin, all the couplets he quotes for all 12 of his paintings are Qian Ju, Qian Shi. Why? Because he likes complexity. Because he likes a challenge. He likes, you know, multi-image lines. Shitao, all his lines are Wu Yan because he likes simple lines. But what he does with them is equally creative. It's just that these are easy lines to paint, but so it's, again, I'm speculating, but to me it's like what's going through Shitao's mind. What I would say, he noticed these lines. Now the fact this is a poem about warfare and the devastation is Shitao wants to show us those two lines could be represented in a completely different way. I'm not going to do a painting about warfare. I'm not going to do a painting about desolation of the countryside. I'm going to do a painting of Du Fu, my Du Fu. The Du Fu I imagine sitting on a rock overlooking a lovely, you know, river scene. Isn't it interesting how, right? Now I think to myself, okay, so 风吹面, it's so interesting with Chinese language, right? 风吹面, you know, in Du Fu's line, if we believe Qiu Zhaoao, is supposed to be an image of unpleasant image, right? 风吹面. But the same words, 风吹面, could be, oh, right? It's a lovely little fresh breeze, blowing them. It's very interesting, right? The I don't know what to call it. The multidimensionality or polysemantic feature of Chinese language. The very same words can be, depending on how you situate them, right, can have completely different connotations. So, okay, so I'm through the examples I wanted to show you. The last thing I'll say about these two contrasting 杜甫诗与土字 is that I think they're both fascinating and creative, and yet the strategies that the two painters are using are so different. I don't want to suggest that one album is superior to the other or anything like that. They're both wonderful and they're both creative, but what the painters are doing in the way they use these Dufu lines is like goes in different directions. So I think that's interesting. I'll stop talking here and invite your questions and comments. Thank you.
Professor Egan, thank you for your excellent talk.
Yeah.
I think your study is very, very interesting and innovative. And time for Q&A, and I think we have about 18 minutes. Any question?
Yeah, well, thank you, Professor Egan, for the very inspiring lecture. Enlightened, very enlightened. I've got two questions. First question, what do you think about the sound element of this composite art? Because you are talking about text and images, and because we know the paintings, the images would present the visual element, and then the painters are citing the text or they are writing the text. So the text would have also conveyed elements, including the thought element. And then some of the writings are rhymed and some of them are not, and some of them are quotations from a poem, and a poem could be rhymed or not. So the sound element would be also crucial or elemental. So what do you think about, do you have any further elaboration on the sound elements of this composite art? I think that would be really composite. Okay. And then my second question would be about, what do you think about the reasons why these Western art historians would be ignoring the text or the colophons of the painting for a long time?
You're going to get me into trouble now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for both questions. The sound, you're absolutely right, and I haven't addressed that. Yeah, there's the sound if you putting Tang poetic lines, they're rhyming lines, and that's interesting. So you're adding an auditory element to the painting. And then there's also, of course, the lines themselves may talk about sounds, like 竹树萧萧画不成, right? And already way back in late Tang Wu Dai period, we have 体画诗 that are already playing with the idea that what the painters can't, one thing the painters can't do is they can't represent sound the way poetry can. And then we've also seen in my example about the Li Bai poem with the xiang zi, with the fragrance, right? The painter claiming that he can visually create images that evoke the fragrance, the smell, right? So there's this synesthesia going on between, image and smell and sound. So this crossing, mixing of sense perceptions is something that comes up a lot, and it's natural that it would come up a lot because you're already mixing poetic lines that have semantic content with painters' images that don't, right? So it's kind of not surprising that this synesthetic mixing of sense perceptions becomes a comment. Now the second question, which is going to get me in trouble, is why do Western art historians ignore these paintings? And the short answer is because they're trained in art history departments, and they're only comfortable talking about images. And they're actually, I don't think I'm being unfair if I say they're actually intimidated by the words, because it's not their training. And so it's no accident that I'm focusing on this, because my training is in literary studies. So it's not an accident. So okay, it may sound arrogant of me to say, but I think it's true. I think their training in art history is deficient. I mean, it may be fine for European art history where there are no words on the painting, but in Chinese art history, darn it, sorry, but there's words on the paintings, and you better deal with those words. Okay. I've said enough. We have other questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Other question?
Thank you for a fascinating talk. I just have a question about a small detail of a Shitao painting, of Wang Wei's home. So the title of that, the original title was Shandong, and on the painting, I noticed that he inscribed Shanzhong in the mountains. So I was wondering if whether you think it is an intentional modification, or whether he's misremembered, or is he painting a different version?
In a case like that, I'm just speculating, in a case where it's so close, I suspect that it's just misremembered. And who knows, if we went back and consulted multiple editions of Wang Wei's poetry, there might be variant titles. So it may not even be a misremembering. It may actually, he may be repeating some version of the title that actually is legitimate in some edition. So I doubt that as you saw from my other example with the Jiangyan Fu, when he rewrites, he really rewrites. Okay, it's not subtle. Okay, so I suspect that's the case. But thanks for the question. I mean, it could be that there's something going on very subtle.
Yeah, I was wondering whether that little change was related to his choice of painting the people, his brothers.
It could be. But there again, you have to ask. Was that Shitao's rewriting, or was it just he's relying on a different version of a legitimate different version of the title? Yeah.
Firstly, I want to add Justin that you mentioned Jinlong's one man standing with one of his legs on the stool and pointing and looking out of the water lily pond. And the first stanza, the scene, and the second stanza talks about the romantic relationship that in his memory, and you just said that you don't know why these two stanzas is so separated and they don't reveal the relationship inside this. But I wanted to add that we have to pay attention to the title of the painting, which is 默戏, playful with it. So the paint is just want to have fun and to play with.
Okay, thank you. That's a wonderful thought, and you may be absolutely right that this is the C, this is the 默戏, this is the playfulness, this is the. I'm deliberately presenting you with an anomaly. I'm deliberately presenting you with a trick, with a game. And it's up to you to figure out the solution to this puzzle, right? Yeah, it may be. On the other hand, let's also remember that 默戏 is a very common painting title, okay? Very common.
Paintings also have this kind of playful.
No, the disjunction between words and images in this painting is extreme. It's unusual.
Particularly only applied to this.
Yes. And the other paintings in this album, the whole album is called 默戏. Okay, the whole album is called 默戏.
So from this perspective, my suggestion might not
help us.
Okay, then my second question is, you mentioned that some painting just paint building, not the scenery, not the inscription or the poems they wrote. Some painting entirely or paint the scenery, more other elements, and some also change the elements. And what Shitao has done is he transcends the feeling of the original quotation and bring it to a sublime, a higher level that can lead us to a better feeling or something optimistic rather than we just indulge in the impression. So what I want to ask is, you just mentioned that there is no superiority between different kinds of art. But does the painting that both depict the scenery and also convey the feeling and also transcend the emotion will be the best? or better than other kinds you just
Okay, so I mean, it depends on what the viewer's criteria are. You know, some viewers might be the most interested by the paintings that are the most faithful to the original, and say, oh, that's the best one because it's the most faithful to the Tang poem, the Tang poetic lines. Other viewers will bring different criteria to their judgment. I use the terms simple and complex because I think they're accurate, but I didn't mean value necessarily to have value judgments in them. Okay, I think we don't need to impose value judgments.
Or just to make classification, because especially for artworks, there's no that.
Well, not all art critics would agree that there's no best, but maybe you and I can agree, but not everyone would agree. Okay, so we have another question in the back. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring talk. My first question actually is, I might share this question with Professor Zhongshu. The example you gave from the Bai's poem, 风吹柳花满店香, that sometimes is also read as the fragrance of the wine. And if we follow that kind of interpretation of this poem, then would you say that it's sort of a deliberate misinterpretation of the original poem, which is also a genius stroke of this recreation visual form? So that's the first comment. And the second one is Chao's rewriting of the 春草绿波 poem. And I found it quite fascinating how he transforms this original line of sorrow or sadness into a scene of joy. And that reminds me of the recreation of one poem in the novel Letranas wrote in the 19th century, where he rewrites the lines in joyful parties composed previously into sad lines in the novel he recreates later. So there is a very interesting juxtaposition of joy and sorrow, party and party in both cases. And I wonder if you've seen this kind of recreation parallel in some other art forms in previous you've looked at. And the last one is a very broad kind of thoughts following the more actually comments. So the last example you gave on Shi Tao's line, that's really taken out of the context of the poem totally. And I wonder, this immediately led me to think of the categorical association, where you can use one phenomenon as a starting point, as an instruction, and then start to play with it. So would you say it's a form of intermediary education, if you would make it that way, between the visual and textual forms that you've seen in the Thank you.
Okay, thank you for all your comments. I'll just quickly, I mean, I don't know about the Xiang, is Shi Tao. Maybe it's too much to ask him to be dealing in his painting with multiple different interpretations of the same Li Bai line. Probably it's enough for him just to be dealing with one interpretation, which is the Liu Hua Xiang means Liu Hua Xiang, not some other fragrance. And the other thing I'd like to say in response to your interesting comments is that it's not only the painters who can take things out of ancient poetic lines, rip them out of their original context and endow them with new meaning. Of course, if we think about earlier Chinese literary history, if we think about Shi Jing, 断章取义, right? 断章取义, right? In Warring States period, it's already commonplace for people making speeches to quote 2 or 3 lines out of Shi Jing and completely change their original meaning and context, right? So there's a great Chinese tradition of, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. You call it recycling or creative appropriation or creative quotation, whatever you call it. There's a grand tradition of this that goes back very, very far, long before the Tihua Shi that I'm talking about today. It doesn't have to be the twist, the twisting, the recreation, the new endowment of meaning doesn't have to be in a different media. In this case, painting, right? It can be still using words, but still changing the original sense. Yeah, thank you.
We have 1 minute left.
Yeah, please. Can we give this gentleman a microphone?
We can feel very thought-provoking. First of all, very brief comment again about Waldo poetry, but from art history perspective, because Sean mentioned in the style of.
Can you speak a little louder?
Yeah, you were saying that Shihao painted the pathway to the top of the mountain very conspicuous, and I would just say I wanted to add a comment that Shihao said he was doing this style of Fanpan and sort of the visual characteristic of Fanpan Shishan is a very noteworthy vertical horizontal pathway.
Right. Well, thank you for pointing that out.
And second, maybe another general question is, because you show that a lot of Shihao's modification of otherwise sad poetic lines into a more jolly and joyful mood, painting the identity of Shi is sort of a verbal clue that he left for our readers in their time.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, that's a nice thought. Maybe his own personal background gave him this striking commitment to taking more positive out. I mean, it's a tragic background, a tragic personal background, right? And maybe some people then become tragic, become sad their whole life, but other people manage somehow to turn it around psychologically.
This comment makes it really interesting because when we are trying to contextualize it, then somehow.
But I mean, I think even if you were not sensitive to the words that he puts on his paintings, if you just look at the corpus of the Shihao paintings, you cannot miss the fact that there's this playful innocence that pervades his painting. I mean, it's just there. It's really attractive. That's one of the things people are so much enjoy. Shihao.
A very general question is wondering if this voice adding the commentary and also develop a really repertory.
So the question is,
I'm just wondering if there's sort of underlying.
Well, okay. So I mean, my simple answer is that I think by the time you get to Ming Dynasty painting history, that the painters are ambitious and confident enough in what they're doing that they begin to compare themselves to the great Tang poets. I mean, why are they all producing these dufu shi tu ci, right? They're like, it's like, yeah, I mean, we can engage in our art, we can engage the greatest Tang poet, and we can do something very creative with his lines. It's I think actually that if someone studies the reception history of dufu and you don't pay attention to what Mingqing painters are doing with dufu, that you're missing something. When we think about reception history, we think in purely literary terms, but maybe it's good to take a broader view. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
In the capacity of moderator, I would like to make a request. I learned that your book, Word, Image, and Live in the Life of Su Xi, will be translated into Chinese. Is this true?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It's going to be
Congratulations.
published.
And can I have one in fee? Yeah, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.